In this video, we're going to look at editing and just being productive with mbeddr and MPS. First of all, it is important to emphasize again that MPS is a projectional editor, which means that when you enter things, it's not that you enter text and then there's a parser. Instead, every editing activity is directly bound to the abstract syntax tree. So this means that you can only enter literally what is valid in the respective context. This is why you can press Control Space anywhere. You can only enter things that are valid, and so these valid things are shown in the code completion menu. For example, you can create an instance of position, which is of course this struct here, and call it P, and then continue typing 10 times 2. Now, of course, that's a type error here. Now, the problem is that if you type something else, like, I don't know, let's assume we have a struct pos3d, right? So this struct is not yet defined. You cannot enter it. It remains red. So whenever things are red font with a light red background, it's unbound. And unbound things are simply invalid. You can always press Control Space and then it tells you, oops, it seems there is nothing that starts with pos3d. You can press Control Space again and it kind of moves the cursor to the beginning and shows you everything. So if you wanted to enter this thing, then you first have to define a pos3d struct, for example, and then you can go here and you can enter pos3d, right? So you can enter things by just typing, I just type int 8 x equals 10, xx, and you can always press Control Space, right? You can say int, and you can select int 8 xx equals 10. Now, some things we have provided special support for entering, for inputting them forward. So for example, let's assign to a global var, and of course global var doesn't exist, but you can press Alt-Enter. Alt-Enter is the intentions menu, and then you can create, for example, a global variable, and then you can Control Space bind it, and you can assign to it. But these things are specifically built, and for example, there is none of these things. Okay, well, that exists already. Let's make a pos4d, and there is no create struct, right? So you cannot use this. We could build that, but we don't have at this point. So always, you can only enter things that are valid in terms of the code completion menu. You can always press Control Space in any context, and for some things like local var, Alt-Enter, local variable, right? Then you have this variable created and you can assign to it. Now, let's get rid of this again. You've already seen the Alt-Enter thing. That's called an intention, and intentions play an important role in MPS and mbeddr. Some things are only possible through intentions. For example, if you wanted to export this struct, exporting means that it essentially goes to the header file, then you press Alt-Enter and then you toggle the export flag. You can select in this intentions menu via up-down cursor or by typing, right? So if you want to export something, you press Alt-Enter, export, and you have it there. You can remove most of these flags by going here and pressing backspace. So that usually works. Now, some things, like for example an if statement, if you enter an if statement, you get this thing expanded automatically, right? So as soon as you type if, you get the if statement bound here. So that's fine for statement-like things, but for expressions you really want to be able to enter things linearly. So let's put something in here. Opening parentheses, we have to bind it because there are several things. So let's say x greater y, question mark, I don't know, true, false. That's not a very useful expression here, but you can see that you can just type along like x plus y times 3 greater than 5. So this is another expression. So you can enter expressions linearly, and by pressing backspace here, you can also delete them linearly. So that works fine all fine. So whenever you have a reference to something, like for example, let's see here, this position thing, you can always press Control-click to go to its definition. Alternatively, you can do Control-B if you don't want to use the mouse. On the other hand, you can select this thing and press Alt F7, and that gives you the Find Usages dialog. You can specify what you want to see, like find the node usages, and then it gives you, for example, in this case, the uses here and there. So Alt F7 is the opposite of go to definition, find references. You can also press Control F12 almost everywhere, and this gives you the outline view, and you can then here start typing and select something and go there. So that's also very useful. Now, selecting things is interesting because, once again, this is a projectional editor, and so selecting things like with the mouse doesn't really work. So what you do is, if you want to select stuff, you select the node, and then you press Control up to select along the tree, right? So you start with this expression here. The parent of that expression is the assignment expression. Its parent is the assignment. This is an expression statement, and the if statement and going up is the function, and going up is the module here. So pressing Control up down is the best way to select stuff. And of course, then you can also delete things by pressing backspace. Sometimes, if you have lists of things, like for example, I'm selecting this argument, and then I press Shift up and down. Shift up and down selects siblings. So if you have a list of things, Shift up and down selects along the list, whereas Control up and down selects along the tree structure. That takes some getting used to in the beginning, but it's actually quite useful, and it's much more productive than text selection, because especially in programming, you really usually want to select along the tree. Now, deleting, we already talked about it. If you delete typically in statements, if you delete at the end, it removes the whole statement. If you delete before the semicolon, it in this case deletes, things along the expression. And of course, you can always undo. That's of course always useful. Now, sometimes it is useful to be able to wrap things. Like, for example, you want to put a knot around this. You can press Control-Alt-T, this is the surround with, and then, for example, do a knot here, and then it surrounds it. There are other things you can surround with, yeah. Now, you can also sometimes do, in many cases, well, it depends whether we've built that, you can do a refactoring. You mark this, and then you go to refactoring, and for example, do an introduce local variable. That's the px, let's say, and then it introduces this here. So refactorings are another way to interact with the editor. Sometimes you want to select whatever you're currently working with, like for example, this module in the project view. You can press Alt F1 and then press Enter, and it selects this thing in the project view. Finally, you may want to build stuff to actually run it. There is Control F9, on the Mac it's Command F9, and that does an incremental build. As you can see, it starts up here. Make is of course the incremental build. I also suggest that you define a keyboard mapping for Control Alt F9, which is a complete rebuild of the current solution. You can set your own keyboard shortcuts, obviously, and you do that by going to the preferences, and in the preferences you can go to the keyboard mappings here and, for example, search for rebuild, and as you can see, I have a rebuild module, which is the current solution, mapped to Command Alt F9. So this was a quick overview over some of the important editing gestures and keyboard shortcuts. You should really, remember them, write them down, maybe get used to them. Makes you much more productive. They are also explained briefly in the user guide, as in a kind of cheat sheet at the very beginning, and you should take a few minutes and internalize them. It makes your life much easier.